Well, for more on the trade talks and where they may be headed, my colleague Sean Callebs spoke to David Dollar. He's a senior fellow in the John L. Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. And Sean first asked him if there's any hope for a breakthrough in negotiations.
Well, we should have a little bit of hope because I think the two sides have decided not to escalate. So you could look very cynically at this and say the U.S. team flew across the Pacific, had dinner, had a 4-hour meeting, and then they agreed to reconvene in September. So you could laugh at this, but just the fact that they did it stalls things a little bit. So we're not going to have any escalation in the next 2 months. I think we can be pretty sure. And frankly, markets have reacted positively to that, both in China and the U.S. So nobody's happy with the current situation, nobody in the business community. But now we seem to have taken escalation off the table for the moment. And I think it's probably not going to be in President Trump's interest to escalate any time between now and the election. But it may not be in his interest to really resolve this between now and the election. I mean, any realistic deal is going to be a compromise, and he will get criticized. You know, if he makes a deal with China, a pretty comprehensive deal, people will say it's not perfect. And he may decide it's a better political calculus to not have a deal. You know, what they're talking about is what I call a mini deal. China resumes some purchases of soybeans, takes some of the pressure off our farmers. U.S. eases up a bit on Huawei. No escalation. All of that's good, but that's not what this was all started over.
Let's take a look at the global economy. It's feeling the effects, and the year-to-year trade between the two nations has gone down significantly. That is not good news.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, if you look a little bit more deeply from the U.S. side, I argue that basically what we're doing is we're redirecting our imports to other, instead of importing from China, our imports from Mexico are way up, our imports from South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, European Union. So total imports are up, and the U.S. trade deficit is up, right? The trade deficit with China is down a little bit, but the trade deficit with everybody else I just mentioned is up. So we're redirecting trade, and that's inefficient, but it's better than we're not actually cutting back on trade. And if you look at from the China side, it's almost the same picture. China's exports to the U.S. have gone down, but China's exports to Europe have gone up. Overall, exports are relatively flat. I'm looking at the whole first 6 months of the year compared to the year before. Flat, that's not good because China's a growing economy, but it's also not a disaster.
Kind of look at this going forward. You have not been a fan of tariffs the whole time. Is this going to work? And does it help when U.S. President Donald Trump comes out and says, oh, all this money on tariffs, it's going into our coffers?
Right, so that's just wrong. I mean, it's going into the coffers, but it's coming out of the pockets of American consumers. So the tariffs, at this point, they've accumulated to a level that essentially takes away the tax cut for the typical American family, right? So if you look at the last couple of years, there was this big fanfare over a tax cut, and the super rich in America got an enormous tax cut. And then they've increased taxes, and most of this stuff is bought by middle-class people. So basically, it's all now a wash for people in the middle of the income distribution. The rich are still doing fine, because what they got, they got an enormous tax cut, so they can pay a little bit more in tariffs. It's trivial for them. But he's undone the tax cut for the middle class.